It was also the base which was the target of the Pakistani Fatah-2 supersonic missile. Now, from the images that we saw this morning at the time that the Prime Minister spent in the Adampur Air Base, we can safely report there is no visible damage at the base. The Prime Minister gave a rousing speech to rally the troops there, where he underlined once again what he calls the new normal in the India-Pakistan relationship. But he also sent a powerful message with the S-400 air defense systems, the MiG-29s, the fourth generation fighter jet, all of it in the background. These are, of course, Russian-made equipment. We will analyze all of those meanings in just a bit. But here's a glimpse of what the Prime Minister told the troops at the Adampur base.
वो कायरों की तरह छिप कर आए थे, लेकिन भूल गए उन्होंने जिसे ललकारा है वो हिंद की सेना है। हमारी एयरफोर्स ने पाकिस्तान में इतना डीप आतंक के अड्डों को टारगेट किया, सिर्फ 20-25 मिनट के भीतर आपने बहुत सावधानी से, बहुत सतर्कता से सिविलियन एयरक्राफ्ट को नुकसान किए बिना कमाल करके दिखाया। ऑपरेशन सिंदूर से बौखलाए दुश्मन ने इस एयरबेस के साथ साथ हमारे अनेक एयरबेस पर हमला करने की कई बार कोशिश की। बार बार उसने हमें टारगेट किया। पाकिस्तान के ड्रोन, उसके यूएवी, पाकिस्तान के एयरक्राफ्ट और उसकी मिसाइलें हमारे सशक्त एयर डिफेंस के सामने सबके सब ढेर हो गए। आपने टैक को टैक्टिक्स से जोड़कर दिखा दिया है। आपने सिद्ध कर दिया है कि आप इस गेम में दुनिया में बेहतरीन है।
All right, there is now more than ample proof of India's strikes against Pakistan's military installations, its frontline air bases, satellite imagery, which has been procured by Maxar Technologies and then, of course, given to Reuters and ANI, which CNN News 18 has now accessed. It shows the intensity of some of these frontline air bases. Let's take a look at Noor Khan, which is the most important air base in Pakistan. It's right in Rawalpindi, right next to the GHQ. This is the image that was taken before the hit that happened on the 10th of May. This is the before image, and you can see right after that how there are these two giant craters that have been left behind. You can just take a look at the difference between this picture and this picture. This is before the 10th of May. This is on the 11th of May, the day after the strikes, the airstrikes that happened on Noor Khan. And Noor Khan was the critical factor. It was the one that changed the entire Pakistani strategy. It made them then force their DGMO to pick up the phone and call the Indian DGMO, because this was where the headquarters of the Pakistani military is based. And then you have the Mushaf Air Base, which is in Sargodha. Again, one of the frontline air bases. A bunch of their fighter jet squadrons are based there. Again, there is a massive crater that you can see on the runway itself. This is the picture that is before the strike. Like I said, before the intervening night between the 9th and 10th of May. And then these are images from the 11th of May. And you can see a massive crater. We're given to understand that this crater is about 10-15 feet in radius. That's the impact that you saw in the Sargodha Air Base. It has rendered the runway non-operational. What the runway being non-operational essentially means is that they cannot scramble their jets, and there are quite a few squadrons of their fighter jets that are based in the Sargodha Air Base, or the Mushaf Air Base, which of course is named after one of the squadron leaders who died in the 1965 war. So clearly the damage can be seen in this image as well. Then there is Bhulari, which is among Pakistan's newest air bases. Some of the newer aircraft, the JF-17 Thunder, the Chinese 4.5 generation aircraft, the F-16 Fighting Falcon, the 4th generation American fighter jet, all of that is based. This is the image before in Bhulari. It's a high resolution image, satellite image, which shows there is no damage to the facility there. And then the day after, you can see a massive crater. There's a massive crater here bang in the middle of the hangar. Again, what this means is that they cannot scramble some of their frontline 4.5 generation and 4th generation fighter jets, the JF-17s, the F-16 Falcons, from this newest airbase in Bhulari. So it's very clear that Pakistan has suffered substantial damage to at least almost a dozen of its frontline air bases, and that was the real game changer as to what changed between the 9th and the 10th, and eventually when the Pakistani DGMO, realizing and upon orders from his higher-ups, called the Indian DGMO and said that they were ceasing fire. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Modi's visit to the Adampur Air Base today was also on point with its symbolism. It proved that the Adampur Air Base, which the Pakistanis said that they had taken out, is very much active. It is not out of action. It was also a clear message to the United States, whether it's the Rafales, the Sukhois, the S-400s, the MiG-29s. India will not be cutting its ties with Russia in particular. Remember, a large chunk of Indian defense equipment still comes from Russia, close to 40%. The visit shows that India's air assets are safe and guarded, and that India's war on terror right now, as the Prime Minister said in his address to the nation last night, has been paused. It is not ended. Prime Minister also sent out a message that India values these Russian weapons and the defense relationship between Moscow and New Delhi, and wants to be treated as a global partner, not necessarily an American pawn or an American stooge. These weapons have singularly helped the Adampur base. The S-400 certainly has helped the Adampur base guard against the kind of missile attacks that we saw Pakistan launch in the intervening night between the 9th and the 10th. The message also goes to Pakistan that, look, all these tall claims that Adampur, which is the second biggest base in the Northern Command, has been damaged, has been rendered non-functional, all of those are blatant Pakistani lies. The message to Washington, like I said, Trump might say whatever he wants to say on Truth Social. Trump might try to claim credit for intervening and trying to get a peace between Pakistan and India, but none of that really matters. Ultimately, what matters for India is its national interests. Now, in the Prime Minister's background today was the S-400, which is one of the frontline air defense systems in the world. It's a Russian-made air defense system. There was a lot of politics around it a few years ago before India acquired 4 of these S-400s in the first batch. India activated the air defense system for the very first time in an operation this time around. It's a mobile surface-to-air missile system developed by Russia. It's capable of intercepting and destroying all kinds of aerial targets, projectiles that are coming your way, whether it's an aircraft, a drone, a cruise missile, a ballistic missile. The S-400 has a range of up to 400 kilometers, which means it can detect any projectile that's coming your way up to 400 kilometers and up to an altitude of 30 kilometers. It can engage at a given point of time 3 dozen targets simultaneously with 4 different types of missiles. It is the most, currently, in the world right now, the most dangerous operationally deployed modern long-range SAM in the world. It's considered much ahead of the US-developed THAAD, or the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, or the THAAD, which of course the Israelis also use a version of the THAAD, which now they've developed into the much more sophisticated Iron Dome. Another air asset that was seen during the Prime Minister's visit today to Adampur was the MiG-29. It's the workhorse of the Indian Air Force, the 4th generation fight. The MiG-29 is a twin-engine, Soviet-designed fighter aircraft, a 4th generation fighter jet. Originally oriented towards combat, many MiG-29s have been furnished in their role as multi-role fighters, capable of performing a number of different operations, whether it is commonly outfitted with a range of air-to-surface armaments as well, and precision munitions. The Indian MiG-29s have been in use since the 1990s. It was extensively used during the Kargil War in 1999 by the Indian Air Force. The Indian MiGs have been modified and are capable of deploying the Adder air-to-air missile as well. Let's listen in to what the Prime Minister said over in Adampur today.
पाकिस्तान के अंदर टेरर हेडक्वार्टर्स को हिट करने का था, आतंकियों को हिट करने का था, लेकिन पाकिस्तान ने अपने यात्री विमानों को सामने करके जो साजिश की रची, मैं कल्पना कर सकता हूं वो पल कितना कठिन होगा जब सिविलियन एयरक्राफ्ट दिख रहा है। और मुझे गर्व है आपने बहुत सावधानी से, बहुत सतर्कता से सिविलियन एयरक्राफ्ट को नुकसान किए बिना कमाल करके दिखाया, उसका जवाब दे दिया। साथियों, ऑपरेशन सिंदूर से बौखलाए दुश्मन ने इस एयरबेस के साथ साथ हमारे अनेक एयरबेस पर हमला करने की कई बार कोशिश की। बार बार उसने हमें टारगेट किया, लेकिन पाक के नापाक इरादे हर बार नाकाम हो गए।
While US President Donald Trump has been claiming repeatedly over the weekend and again yesterday that it was the US that mediated between India and Pakistan and the two neighbors had agreed to a full and immediate ceasefire, but Trump's remark has been outrightly rejected by the Ministry of External Affairs. So how exactly, what's the inside story for how this truce was brokered? So there is a lot of speculation as to how the truce between India and Pakistan, which Indian officials are describing as a stoppage of firing, not a ceasefire, how was this brought about? Did America play a role in it? Trump's tweets seem to suggest that, but top government sources here in India say they vehemently deny that President Trump or the Americans had any role in bringing about this stoppage of fire. This is how the sequence of events played out, at least according to top Indian government sources. This is what brought Pakistan down to its knees and forced the DGMO of the Pakistan Army to pick up the phone and call his Indian counterpart, announcing a stoppage of fire. On the night of 9th of May, Prime Minister Modi spoke to US Vice President J.D. Vance. It was a phone call that went on for about an hour. Vance, in that phone conversation, described to Modi what he felt like was a big escalation that was coming India's way. Perhaps Vance was forewarned by American intelligence that Pakistan was preparing for a large-scale assault, one that would be launched on Friday night after the IMF announcement of a bailout package being cleared for Pakistan. In that telephone call between Modi and Vance, Modi patiently listened to Vance, but he did not commit to anything. He simply told Vance that if Pakistan continues firing, then India will also continue firing. India will not stop. In the words used by one Indian government official, this is what Modi said: "Wahan se goli chalegi, to yahan se gola chalega." A couple of hours after the Vance-Modi phone call, things escalated dramatically between India and Pakistan. Pakistan, in a coordinated assault, tried to attack more than 24 Indian military and civilian installations. The most dramatic attempts were to try and take down some of India's frontline air bases and air force stations. Some of these include Pathankot, Adampur, Udhampur, Sirsa, Jammu and Srinagar. But none of these Pakistani attacks were successful. In fact, all of them were foiled by India's strong air defenses. This, though, India could not take lying down. So on the 10th of May, in the early morning hours, India struck back at Pakistani air bases in retaliation. At least 11 Pakistani major and forward air bases were hit. Some of the extensive damage has now been captured in satellite images. The biggest hits were in the Noor Khan Air Base in Rawalpindi, what was previously known as the Chaklala Air Base, the Murid Air Base in Chakwal, the Rafiki Air Base, the Sargoda Air Base and the Jacobabad Air Base. India, through these strikes at frontline Pakistani air bases, had drawn a new red line, that no target in Pakistan was taboo anymore. India was willing to hit deep inside Pakistan and particularly in the heartland, which is Punjab or Pakistani Punjab, which is where a bulk of the top military establishment comes from. A couple of days before that, India had signaled that no terror target too was taboo for India. that it could hit deep inside Bahawalpur, the headquarters of the Jaish-e-Mohammed, and Muridke, the headquarters of the Lashkar-e-Taiba, both in the heart of Punjab. The hit on the Noor Khan Air Base, which was one of the biggest and oldest air bases in Pakistan, rattled the military leadership in Rawalpindi. It also happens to be very close to Pakistan's Strategic Command and Control Center, which oversees Pakistan's nuclear command. Now, this really rattled Pakistani generals. In fact, there are some reports even suggesting that General Asim Munir, the Chief of Army Staff, after the Noor Khan base hit, was moved to a specially designed nuclear protection bunker. After this, a rattled Pakistan goes crying to the United States of America. So subsequently, on the morning of the 10th of May, which was Saturday, there was a phone call by US Secretary of State and Acting National Security Advisor Marco Rubio to the Pakistan Army Chief, General Asim Munir. This was the first conversation that Marco Rubio has had directly with the Pakistan Army Chief, General Munir, since he came to office a few months ago. It was this call between Rubio and Munir that proved to be the game changer. By the morning of the 10th, which was Saturday, General Munir realized that the Pakistan Army was caught in a losing battle. That if India could take out some of Pakistan's strategic and forward air bases, then that takes away a huge tactical advantage away from Pakistan. The import of what India did to these forward air bases of Pakistan is that the Pakistani Air Force would be rendered ineffective. It couldn't scramble some of its frontline fighter jets. Its F-16s would have been rendered useless. In that phone call, Munir reportedly told Rubio, "Tell India that we will stop firing." A few hours later, Rubio then spoke to his Indian counterpart, Dr. Jaishankar. Rubio apprised the External Affairs Minister of his conversation with the Pakistani Army Chief. Rubio then told Jaishankar that Pakistan was willing to stop the firing. The External Affairs Minister, in response, told Secretary of State Rubio that India had only one condition, that if Pakistan stops the fire, then so will India. But if Pakistan continues to fire, then so will India. But there was one other important strategic calculation or messaging that needed to come through, and that is that this message that Pakistan will not fire needed to come from the official Pakistani channels to the official Indian channels without any third-party intervention or mediation. Now, one of the main and perhaps only operational military channels was the hotline between the two DGMOs, the Director Generals of Military Operation. So Jaishankar told Rubio that has to come through the official channels, which is the hotline between the two DGMOs. He also thanked the United States, but he said that we don't need American assistance. This has to be bilaterally dealt with between India and Pakistan. So subsequently, the Pakistan DGMO called the Indian DGMO at around 1 p.m. on Saturday. At that time, the Indian DGMO was not available to pick the call, and then subsequently, that conversation happened about 3:35. That is when, in that call between the two DGMOs, that is when it was agreed that Pakistan and India will stop firing from 5 p.m. Saturday. It was the power and military differential that made Pakistan come crawling to the negotiating table. Indian government sources say there was no question of any sort of American mediation. If anything, the Americans were simply messengers carrying messages from India to Pakistan and vice versa. But ultimately, what sealed the deal was General Munir realizing that the Indian air attacks had made mincemeat of his airfields, and there was no way that he could continue with this war and try to win this war by climbing the escalation ladder. Of course, one other thing happened to be. All right, I want to go across now to Fareed Zakaria, host of GPS on CNN, to try and make sense of what is it that has been achieved in Operation Sindoor and the subsequent 3 days of big escalation by both India and Pakistan, where the two countries were, if not on the brink of war, already at war, and how this de-escalation was brought about. Fareed, thank you very much for joining us here on CNN News 18. First things first, so Prime Minister Modi yesterday addressed the nation and he said, We've now created a new normal. People are calling this the Modi Doctrine. He outlined three things. He said, one, if Pakistan tries to indulge in a terror attack, it will be repaid at a cost which is 5x or 10x. Number two, he said this whole idea of a nuclear blackmail bluff that India has shown on multiple occasions there are a range of options sub-nuclear where Pakistan can be made to feel the pain. And number three, he said that we're not going to distinguish between state and non-state actors. Do you reckon that this is now India's sort of new normal when it comes to dealing with Pakistan and terror that emanates from Pakistan?
It is a new normal, but it is really an evolution of Indian policy for the last 20, 25 years. You know, what's happened ever since the beginning of this sort of sponsorship of state-supported terror groups, which really begins in the 1990s, in its most recent incarnation, India has escalated over, you know, if you look back, it used to only do things in the line with, you know, close to the line of control. Now it's moved beyond that. Now it's moved, you know, toward stuff in Pakistan itself. So there has been, over these last decades, an escalation, partly born out of with the fact that Pakistan was not being deterred, partly out of, I think, a certain Indian confidence and pride that comes from India's growth and new stature on the world stage. So I do think it's new. It's not. It's part of a continuation that's been, frankly, bipartisan across both the Congress and the BJP governments. The real challenge, though, is will it deter Pakistan? Because, you know, at some level, the Pakistani military lives for this kind of tension. This is what drives Pakistan's military's budget up. This is what gives Pakistan's military status within the society. So this is the dilemma, which is Pakistan is a failed economic basket case with a powerful military that justifies its existence because it has to defend against what it sees as Indian attacks. So the fact that India does more attacks is not clear to me. It will deter because of this particular dynamic of a failed state run by an army in Pakistan.
One of the things that experts here in India seem to be pointing out too is that this is the first time frontline military installations were hit. About a dozen or so air bases, some of them forward air bases, they were rendered unusable. So what we're being told is that, look, the pain is now being felt by the Pakistan army. Although the intention, the first operation that happened on the 7th of May, it was just these terror sites. But eventually, because Pakistan chose to escalate, these military installations were also hit and hit quite badly. That, they're saying, will show the cost of pain to the Pakistani military, and thereby there might be some recalibration in their support to these terror proxies. Do you buy that?
I think it's an intelligent strategy. How far exactly you should go, I'm not sure. I think the key is, can you find a way to make the Pakistani military pay an unacceptable cost? You know, what are Pakistani military assets? What are their crown jewels that would be, hardest or most expensive to replace? That's the kind of calculation I would do, and it seems plausible what India is trying to do. But as I say, the challenge you face is that you have a Pakistani military that thrives on tension between India and Pakistan.
So there was also a bit of confusion around, how the détente was brought about. Suddenly, we were all expecting a press conference from the Indian Foreign Secretary. This was 6 o'clock in the evening on Saturday, and about half an hour before that, President Trump puts out on Truth Social that, the United States, the Trump administration, is mediated between India and Pakistan, and, there's going to be a full and immediate ceasefire. There's been a lot of consternation here in India, certainly in government circles, about that. The government of India and its officials have been going to great lengths to point out that it wasn't, first of all, American mediation, and second of all, this de-escalation happened because they were able to demonstrate, the Indian military was able to demonstrate, that there is a substantial military differential between the Indian and Pakistani responses, and that's why Pakistan, waved the white flag and came to the peace table.
Look, there's been a lot of jingoistic rhetoric around this, and it's honestly difficult to tell exactly what happened. What is clear is that President Trump shot from the hip, by which I mean he, very quickly wanted to take credit for what happened. And did what he often does, which is, shot from the hip without thinking it through, without probably consulting State Department experts. And so both the fact that he did it the way he did has been badly received in India. Also, the actual language he used has been received badly in India, because it seems to treat the two sides as equal. It seems to treat India as a kind of hyphenated project with Pakistan. All the things that India has worked very hard to unravel over the last 20 years, Trump put back together in one tweet. So unfortunately, it's an example of how President Trump operates. If you think about the tariffs, it's a similar story where he does stuff which then turns out to not work, and then he withdraws it. I think that it's very important for the Indian government to convey to Washington, what the problems what they had with the approach that was taken, why they don't want India to be considered simply in this context. I suspect that the thing Trump announced about a meeting in a neutral zone to have peace talks in general is probably not true, as Prime Minister Modi suggested. Any conversation would just be about terror. So all this has to be clarified. And if there's one area where I wonder why the Modi government is being so hesitant, I think it would be appropriate for India to publicly describe its differences or its objections. So far there have been, 3 times now, the Indians being handcuffed and sent back to India, the tariffs, and now this case, where India has kept quiet about various American initiatives that impact on India and have not been well received. I don't think that's the right approach. I think it would be perfectly appropriate for the Indians, as the Canadians have done, to say, look, this is not how we see things, and to articulate India's point of view. The Modi government has been strangely very, very quiet on these issues.
There is a view, certainly amongst a lot of Modi supporters, and I would say, in the political spectrum to the right of Modi, that, look, we were just beginning to launch into this operation against Pakistan, and this was the time to teach Pakistan a lesson, in as much as, you can't have this, these big terror attacks every few years, and then there's punitive action, and then again, there's a lull for a few years, only for that cycle to repeat. That this time, actually, you could go in there and raise the cost and raise the pain to the Pakistani establishment to a level that they would be successful in breaking this cycle of terror followed by punitive action. And then suddenly, within the 3rd day, for whatever reason, American mediation or otherwise, that escalation cycle was called off. How would you view that degree of, disappointment, consternation, call it what you want?
I understand the feeling. It makes perfect sense that you feel as though you don't want to be held hostage by these terror attacks and, dictated by them, and then you have to exercise restraint, as India has often done. But look at America's history with, fighting terror attacks in Afghanistan or in Iraq. You can push back very hard, but those groups exist for this conflict. So the fact that you push back is only going to probably mean they will then retaliate. And where do you go with that? India has the most to lose from this whole cycle of violence, because India is thriving. It's on a growth trajectory. India needs peace and prosperity to lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. Whereas for these jihadi groups, what they exist for is the conflict. So the more you batter them, the more they strike back. I'm not sure it is it's unjustifiable and understandable, but is it strategically wise? Even when you look at the Pakistani military, let's look at the heart of why this probably began, and we're all speculating. But my own sense is that here you have a Pakistani army chief who essentially took over the civilian government. They did a kind of soft coup against the most popular figure in Pakistan, Imran Khan, the prime minister, put him in jail. You remember Imran Khan fired him, Munir, as the head of ISI. So the Pakistani military is unpopular in Pakistan. This is a way to rally the country around the military, rally the country around the flag. So further conflict with India only helps the Pakistani military and General Munir in his goal, which is not really anything more than to make the Pakistani military central to in that country and to bring public support around it. So that's the complexity here. You have to be strategically wise, having a defensible moral case is not enough in international relations. You also need to be smart.
One other point of concern has been the evening before this escalation happened. The escalation was essentially between the night of the 9th and the 10th, which was daytime there in the US. You had the IMF meeting, which sanctioned this bailout of a little over $2 billion to Pakistan, despite the fact that the international community very well knew that, look, this whole flare-up had happened between India and Pakistan. For the last 3 decades, from Osama bin Laden to all of these proscribed terrorists like Hafiz Saeed, including, some of these images that have come out after the Operation Sindoor, where proscribed terrorists, along with military personnel, were attending the funerals of terrorists who were killed. And yet, the IMF went ahead and granted the bailout to Pakistan. So there is a degree of concern here in India as to whether the international community was really holding Pakistan accountable.
It's a very difficult problem with Pakistan, because what happens with these IMF bailouts, particularly to places like Pakistan, which are, as I say, sort of basket case economies, if you bail them out, you have the problems that the bad behavior that is going on continues. If you don't bail them out, they collapse. And then what have you gained? In that circumstance, are you likely to get more moderate foreign policy or more responsible behavior? It's not clear. And by the way, keep in mind, your viewers should understand, when the IMF does these bailouts, all they're doing is giving Pakistan the money essentially to pay back the loans that they already owe the IMF. It's essentially a rolling over of loans to Pakistan. Kicking the ball forward. You're not really solving anything, but you're avoiding some kind of cataclysmic breakdown. We get back to the heart of the problem, which is that Pakistan is not a functioning democratic state. It is a country powerfully dominated by an army that has made alliances with jihadi groups, with militias. That it derives its legitimacy from that. It derives its budgets, its enormous budgets from that. If you look as a percentage of GDP, Pakistan is among the highest in the world, the Pakistani military. This is the problem. And this is India's problem, because Pakistan is India's neighbor. The IMF bailout, would you prefer Pakistan that collapses and then maybe there's more jihadi groups?
All right. One final word. What is Operation Sindoor? And India is resoundingly saying it was a success. They've taken out over 100 terrorists, etc. What does this do for Mr. Modi, his image both domestically and internationally?
I think always these kind of military operations provide you with a temporary boost of support, give you a sense of you're speaking for the country, unifies the country. Let's be honest. All the things I was saying about what the tensions do for Pakistan, the Pakistani military, the same is true for the Indian government. The challenge for India, being a mature liberal democracy, is to first of all do a careful analysis and a careful postmortem. Was it as successful? There's been a lot of jingoism, and honestly, the media has been extremely willing to accept the government's narrative. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but the key to a democracy, and why democracies, in my opinion, have better foreign policies, is they examine these issues. They figure out, was it really successful? Where were the shortcomings? What were the areas where it could have done better? I hope there is that kind of real postmortem in India about what happened. And then, as I say, to try to deal with a broader issue, which is what to do about a dysfunctional Pakistan on your border. Some level of deterrence is absolutely necessary, and therefore the military action and military preparedness is one piece of that puzzle, one piece of the solution. But there has to be a broader effort to try to pressure Pakistan to reform itself. I know this sounds like a very, very long shot, but ultimately there has to be some reckoning with Pakistan's structure and these alliances that have been made with these militias, and the role of the Pakistani military within society, which, by the way, is clearly unpopular. I mean, this is the reason Imran Khan became as popular as he was. Is finally he was taking on the military. So let's not forget that the Pakistani people, in many ways, are the victims of all this dysfunction and all this, the kind of calamities that its military has brought upon it, and look for a longer-term solution there.
All right, Fareed Zakaria, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you very much for joining us on CNN News 18.
Always a pleasure.
All right, I also want to queue up a conversation that I had with a politician who is from the opposition camp. He's a multi-term Congress MP, but who's emerged in these last few weeks as a very passionate advocate of putting India's point of view out to the world and certainly to the domestic audience. He calls himself a 100% nationalist before anything else. I sat down with Congress's Member of Parliament from Thiruvananthapuram, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. So there's a lot of political debate around the Constitution. Certainly, if you were to ask the opposition, they would say the Constitution was the number one issue in the 2024 election. Probably the difference between 303 and 240. But Our Living Constitution, it's a new, fascinating book. It's a small one that's been written by an author of numerous books in the past. Dr. Shashi Tharoor, welcome to CNN News 18.
Thank you, Zaka.
Why a book on the Constitution?
Well, the 75th anniversary is what triggered it. I was actually working on something else when my publisher called and said, look, there's all this buzz about the Constitution. Why don't you write a book about it? In some ways, I've been addressing issues related to the Constitution in my various other works. I mean, a couple of years ago during COVID, I brought out a book called The Battle of Belonging, where I interpreted our Constitution's place in whole notions of Indian identity, nationalism, patriotism, and so on. So I thought about some of these issues, and he wanted something. And we both agreed that this had to be not a book for scholars, academics, or laymen, but a book that, reads like an extended op-ed article in a newspaper, for thinking Indians, but generalists. And so it's a concise introduction. It's just 111 pages. I think probably the shortest book I've written.
Is it?
I'll have to double check. Well, there was a short book of aphorisms I co-authored with a friend. But apart from that, this would definitely be the shortest single substantive book. But it's got pretty much everything you need to know about the Constitution, from how many thousand words there are in it, to the influences of different countries on some of the provisions, to some of the debates about the adoption, and of course the whole subsequent evolution of the Constitution over the last 75 years. So you've got the whole story and a bit of a commentary. It's not an overwhelmingly polemical book, but it's my commentary as well.
You have mentioned that how some of the key figures in the Hindutva movement, the founders of the Hindutva movement, were not exactly defenders of the Constitution. But now you trace the 75-year journey, it seems like those folks are on this side. They're defending the Constitution, Mr. Modi's government, and,
Yeah, it's very interesting to see that evolution. When the Constitution was being written, the people who rejected it were the Hindu Mahasabha and the RSS. Golwalkar in particular was scathing in the language, and so are many others in that ecosystem. They objected to everything from the language in which it was written, which was English, to the Western ideas in it, which they said nothing to, and the complete absence of any influence. And the most thoughtful critic of the whole Constitution was Deen Dayal Upadhyay, who, in a series of writings from the 50s and the 60s, essentially made the case that the Constitution rested on a flawed premise of what he called territorial nationalism. That is, that you're thinking that a constitution applies to a territory and all the people on it. Mm-hmm. Wrong, he says. A constitution must apply to a people. And the people of India are the Hindu people. The territory doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. It should be a constitution for the Hindu people. Now, this is a fundamental difference between, obviously, the constitutional approach adopted by the rest of the world and by our own founding fathers, and by what the Hindutva ecosystem wanted to see. And you could understand some of the logic. In fact, there was a Congress leader called Hanumantaya who, during the adoption, said we were looking for the music of the veena or the sitar, and we ended up with an English band. So in other words, there were Indians who also felt the Constitution wasn't Indian enough, even outside the Hindutva ecosystem. But when you looked at the actual functioning of the Constitution, it was meant to empower Indians, give them political autonomy as individuals, give them rights that are legally enforceable, and give them an opportunity to determine their own political destiny through a document which could be interpreted over time, amended over time, and so on. Now, what's very interesting is that that critique, that the Constitution is fundamentally un-Indian, has largely been dropped. You get the occasional academic writing that it's a colonial constitution and so on. But whereas in the first term of the Modi government, Mr. Govindacharya was reported to have been writing an alternative Hindutva constitution, in the second and third terms, we've heard nothing about that. And in fact, Mr. Modi has declared the constitution to be his only holy book, and that's the entire tone.
So
in
how
fact,
do
even Mohan Bhagwat of the RSS has made statements saying that he hails the constitution and defends it.
How do you square off? I mean, you've criticized Mr. Modi's government and the handling of the constitution on issues like federalism, devolution of powers to the states, issue of language, Hindi versus other languages, and at the same time, Mr. Modi, kissing the constitution or bowing down to the constitution before the third term. The government has said that essentially the Congress and the opposition ran a false campaign saying that they will change the constitution if they get 400 seats. So how do you square those two?
Well, I mean, there were some rhetoric before the elections. Ab ki baar 400 par, and the question that the Congress legitimately asked was, kyun 400 par? Why do you want such a large number? Is it because you wanted 2/3 majority to change the constitution? And then that resulted in the Samvidhan Khatre Mein Hai argument, which said that what these guys really want to do is to end reservations. And that had a certain resonance, particularly in some of the northern states. And I think it certainly helped change some seats in UP and Bihar, and arguably reinforce some messaging in Tamil Nadu, where there is a very strong OBC element to the voter base. But on the whole, that debate has now moved on. The BJP has said very clearly they will not affect OBC reservations in any shape or form, and they have even now considered the idea of a caste census. So I think that debate we can move on from. But there are larger issues to the Constitution. The rights it grants. Are those rights being deepened, expanded, and extended? One could argue that a series of Supreme Court judgments have actually done that. They've given more content than perhaps would have been envisaged by the original drafters. Have they become ossified in some respects? Have they become too adventurous? Is PIL, for example, exceeding judicial authority and encroaching on the executive? What about the Anna Hazare movement, which somehow got civil society to press gang the Lokpal amendment into parliament? So there are a lot of issues I've tried to address, and then there are pending issues. Federalism is a clear problem. The word federal doesn't actually occur in the Constitution. People don't realize that. We have written a federal constitution without using the word federalism. How is it working in practice? That is a very important debate.
Delimitation?
The delimitation problem becomes particularly acute with the lapsing of the 84th Amendment in 2026. And that says that the first census after that will be the basis for new Lok Sabha constituencies. Now, there's an inevitable suspicion on the part of many that the BJP, which sees its strength in the Hindi heartland, will use delimitation to give themselves a 2/3 majority by increasing the number of seats in the Hindi heartland, thereby in effect disenfranchising the other states, the South, the Northeast, Bengal, and so on. Now that raises some very alarming questions, as you can well imagine. And that's something we'll have to negotiate amongst the parties, amongst
your
the states.
Solution would be, at least temporarily, would be to hold off on the delimitation exercise?
Well, the solution recommended by the 7-party conference that got together to discuss it is, if Vajpayee Saab could extend Indira Gandhi's 25-year freeze by another 25 years, why can't we also extend it by another 25 years? Kick the can down the road. Now, the BJP could turn around and say that solves nothing, the problem won't go away. And meanwhile, the people of UP are represented in a very unfair way by comparison with the people of Kerala. If I am representing a population of about 2 million people, and a UP counterpart is representing 2.7, 2.9 million people, then is that fair to those people? Forget about the individual concerned. Counter-argument, yes, and maybe that's not so, but Parliament is only to discuss national issues. Why don't you get those people better representation by increasing the number of Vidhan Sabha seats in the state assemblies? That could be a different answer. So that everybody in every country, in every state, should have roughly the same number of people per Vidhan Sabha seat. And that could be one possible way forward, because the argument that problems should be resolved lower down the chain, where they most affect people's daily lives, in any case argues for more decentralization of power. So these are arguments that we could have, but we haven't had the discussion. There hasn't been a sort of informal constitutional discussion on the delimitation issue.
I want to now talk about some of the contemporary issues, and obviously everybody's talking about the India-Pakistan situation, Operation Sindoor. The Prime Minister had an address to the nation yesterday. Do you think now he has framed a Modi doctrine that if Pakistan tries terror, then there will be a cost to pay for that terror? And this whole thing about nuclear blackmail.
No, not only has he, I think, brought that message across very clear with Operation Sindoor, but you will notice there has been a ratcheting up. 2015, after the mistrust or after the trust that was mistakenly placed in Pakistan by inviting them to participate in the Pathankot investigation, after which they went back to Pakistan and said the Indians did it to themselves, there was a sense of complete betrayal in Delhi. And they said, we can never trust these guys again. So one by one, various red lines were crossed. You may remember in Kargil 1999, we lost lives rather than cross the LOC in repelling the Pakistanis. In 2015, Uri, September 2016, Uri, we did cross the LOC and hit the launchpad bases from which these guys had come. 2019, Pulwama, we not only breached the LOC, we breached the international border and we hit Balakot. 2025, Pahalgam, we breached the LOC, we breached the international border, but we didn't hit some unpopulated area. We went right into the heart of Pakistani Punjab and hit places like Bahawalpur and Muridke, which were known terror headquarters of the Jaish-e-Mohammed and the LET, respectively. And we proved that we had precision munitions such that we hit specific buildings we were targeting in those complexes. Impressive, but also in every sense a step up. Now, we will learn lessons from this entire episode because obviously there's some things that the government knows that you and I don't know because we don't have access to classified information as to what worked and what didn't work. But I suspect that if there is another attack, and I hope it'll be some years away, that we will have an even more decisive response to show the Pakistanis it's not just that we will hit you and hit you hard, we will hit you at a level above where we hit you before. So don't take us for granted.
So how many levels before you get to the nuclear threshold? Because that was always conventionally the thing that post-Kargil, that India and Pakistan can never have a full-fledged war because both of them have nuclear weapons. Has Sindoor and Uri, and you refer to Balakot, etc., has that shown that India has a range of options which are sub-nuclear?
Oh yeah, I mean look, Russia and Ukraine. Russia has nuclear weapons. Ukraine has even been bombing Moscow residential apartments and the Russians have not threatened nukes. Nukes exist for doomsday scenarios. They're not meant to be sort of routinely peddled up every time you're losing or getting the bad end of a conflict. Far from it. And that's why nukes have never come into play since 1945. So my own view on this one is the Pakistanis can try and use it to bluff, threaten it to get India to back off or whatever. But other countries will also tell them, listen buddies, you use the nukes and you're toast, you're finished. I mean, your country is going to be wiped off the map, and what's more, we will come and disarm you if the Indians don't. I mean, because no one wants to see a world where nuclear war is a legitimate option. So I just don't see this happening right now. What I'm more concerned about is evaluating the respective merits of weapons, armaments, and technologies available to both sides. Very clearly, we've scored some very important points. International media suggests the other guys have scored some rather severe damage, partially because of Chinese technology. And I think we need to evaluate. We need to be prepared. We need to be sure that what we do next doesn't run afoul of things we can't respond to.
I do want to ask you, what do you think, in your view, led to the de-escalation? Because the American view, the Trump view, seems to be that he mediated. The government of India is at great pains to explain that that's not quite the case.
No, see, mediation is when you get both sides together and talk to each other and relay messages back and forth. I don't think that India would ever have encouraged or wanted that, and it's been against our policy forever. I think what would have happened, and you can look at the Twitter timeline of our foreign minister, he was talking to various foreign ministers. You can look at the Twitter timeline of the foreign ministers of these countries, including America, and they'll all be telling you, we spoke to so-and-so, we spoke to so-and-so. The fact that these conversations take place is normal diplomatic practice in the middle of any global crisis. What was said, I don't imagine at any stage, and I have no personal access, but I do not imagine, from what I know of Indian foreign policy, that our foreign minister would have said to anybody, can you please convey this message to Pakistan? That is simply not our style. I imagine what he would have said is, look, if the Pakistanis do this, we're going to do that. And if the Pakistanis behave in this way, we're going to behave in that way. And this kind of tough talk. And then the guys listening would call the Pakistanis and say, listen, we've just been talking to the Indians and their intention appears to be this and this. Do you really want to take it that far? You know, that kind of conversation, that's not mediation, that's being helpful.
Okay.
That's helpful diplomacy. But as far as I'm concerned, India would not accept mediation, any other thing. A couple of other important things. We would not accept, and I'm afraid Trump's language implies this, any notion of equivalence between us and Pakistan. You don't equate the victim and the perpetrator. We have essentially been the victim of serial killings for 35 years, 36 years, since 1989. We have not, you know, one of the ironies facing the Pakistanis, we had terror bases to hit there. There are no terror bases in India to hit back. That's part of the problem that the Pakistanis are facing. So for us, any equivalence is unacceptable. As we've just discussed, talk about mediation is unacceptable because we don't believe in mediation. Mediation implies that we need others to do. We've got 3 languages in common with the Pakistanis. We can quarrel with them, discuss with them, and solve problems with them in English, in Hindustani, and in Punjabi. We don't really need anybody else to come in.
So why do you think Trump said what he said about the mediation and Kashmir?
He's a politician claiming credit. I wouldn't go beyond that. But if you look at the 2 other objections I have, I mean, I certainly don't want to see Kashmir internationalized. We have, over a very long period of time, established firmly the principle that Kashmir is no longer, from our point of view, an international dispute. It is a domestic problem of India, and we're solving it that way. It hasn't been on the agenda of the UN Security Council for a very long time. So the terrorist attack was engineered by the Pakistanis precisely to re-internationalize Kashmir. The 4th thing, Zaka, is the re-hyphenation of India and Pakistan in the global imagination. That's been the biggest setback.
You think that's concerning?
That's very concerning. We had successfully, over the last 3 decades, ended that process. It started with Clinton. We said, please don't treat us as a waste stop on the way to Pakistan. Don't treat them as a waste stop on the way to us. Just this January, our chief guest for Republic Day was the Indonesian president. He planned naively to go on to Islamabad. We told him, sorry, sir, please don't do it. Otherwise, don't come to us. Because if you're coming to us, go somewhere else. So he went from here to Malaysia instead. That's the kind of de-hyphenation that we had visibly and publicly demonstrated.
But Trump is now rehyphenating.
Yeah, and that's been most unfortunate. So what we need to do is educate Mr. Trump about our thinking and all this so that he's very conscious next time he does these things, that he is actually taking one side of a dispute where he shouldn't. If at all he has to take a side, he should be on ours and not on theirs.
All right, one final word before we close this interview. You seem to be saying nice things about the government these days, and people are speculating that that's not necessarily, you know, with political motives. Is it with political motives?
I speak for my country. I speak as an Indian. Zaka, whatever we all are, politically and otherwise, there is some one identity that makes everything else possible. That makes it possible for you to be a journalist pursuing your profession. That makes it possible for me to be a politician pursuing my profession and winning votes. And that identity is that of India, guaranteed by the Constitution you and I began talking about.
Co-presented by
इस जयघोष की ताकत अभी अभी दुनिया ने देखी है। भारत माता की जय यह सिर्फ उद्घोष नहीं है, ये देश के हर उस सैनिक की शपथ है जो मां भारती की मान मर्यादा के लिए जान की बाजी लगा देता है। ये देश के हर उस नागरिक की आवाज है जो देश के लिए जीना चाहता है, कुछ कर गुजरना चाहता है। भारत माता की जय मैदान में भी गूंजती है और मिशन में भी। जब भारत के सैनिक मां भारती की जय बोलते हैं तो दुश्मन के कलेजे कांप जाते हैं। जब हमारे ड्रोन दुश्मन के किले की दीवारों को ढहा देते हैं, जब हमारी मिसाइलें सनसनाती हुई निशाने पर पहुंचती हैं, तो दुश्मन को सुनाई देता है भारत माता। जब हम सूरज उगा देते हैं तो दुश्मन को दिखाई देता है भारत माता की जय। जब हमारी फौजें न्यूक्लियर ब्लैकमेल की धमकी की हवा निकाल देती हैं, तो आकाश से पाताल तक एक ही बात गूंजती है, भारत माता की जय। साथियों, वाकई आप सभी ने कोटि कोटि भारतीयों का सीना चौड़ा कर दिया है। हर भारतीय का माथा गर्व से ऊंचा कर दिया है। आपने इतिहास रच दिया है। और मैं आज सुबह सुबह आपके बीच आया हूं आपके दर्शन करने के लिए। जब वीरों के पैर धरती पर पड़ते हैं तो धरती धन्य हो जाती है। जब वीरों के दर्शन का अवसर मिलता है तो जीवन धन्य हो जाता है। और इसलिए मैं आज सुबह सुबह ही आपके दर्शन करने के लिए यहां पहुंचा। आज से अनेक दशक बाद भी जब भारत के इस पराक्रम की चर्चा होगी तो उसके सबसे प्रमुख अध्याय आप और आपके साथी होंगे। आप सभी वर्तमान के साथ ही देश की आने वाली पीढ़ियों की और उनके लिए भी नई प्रेरणा बन गए हैं। मैं वीरों की इस धरती से आज एयरफोर्स, नेवी और आर्मी के सभी जाबाजों, बीएसएफ के अपने शूरवीरों को सैल्यूट।
Viewers, I won't say, because I'm not given to triumphalism, that we should be feeling a sense of joy. But certainly, viewers, I think we should be feeling a sense of immense pride at what we've achieved. Viewers, never before has a nuclear weapons power made to look so effete, so weak by another nuclear weapons state. In fact, viewers, there's no precedence for what the Indian military has done. But unfortunately, viewers, over the last few days, the Indian military's finest hour is being sought to be robbed of its sheen by a familiar ecosystem. You know the usual suspects, viewers, I don't have to name them, who are investing all their energies to rake up pointless issues. They're choosing to believe the words of a man who's not even trusted by his own people anymore, of a leader of America who has barely 40% support left. Viewers, There are some amongst us who are